Sure. So we're talking about toe on the front and the rear of the car.
Yes.
And then we're going to be talking about static toe and also dynamic toe.
Yes.
Okay. So the static toe on the front of the drift car will typically have like a starting place on toe plates with 2 measuring tapes. We'll have a difference in the front tape and the back tape of 1/8 inch toe out. And that it's a pretty mellow setting, but it lets you initiate the drift quicker.
Are you talking about the front side?
Yeah, front. So yeah, we're just talking about the tie rods in the front, and with an 1/8 inch of toe out, that's like just a good starting point to have like a quick drift initiation.
How do you know that?
Well, basically, a totally neutral setting would be 0 toe, right? Mm-hmm. So both wheels are straight. It doesn't really have any bias in any direction. But, when we're cruising down the straight and we flick the steering wheel to initiate the drift, we want to bias the steering towards steering to angle.
Yes.
The opposite of that would be if you towed in, then the car would be biased towards going straight. It would kind of fight you a little bit when you flick the steering wheel and toss the car and its weight sideways. Now, in the back, we think about static toe setting as toe out will also, just like the front, it'll make the rear end want to come around. So if you had a low power car, then you would definitely want to put a little bit of toe out in addition to some increased tire pressure in the rear and maybe even a higher spring rate or a stiffer rear sway bar. All those things go together to make the rear end want to come around.
Could you please repeat again? I did not catch up you. So on the rear side, you say a little bit toe out and
also wants to make the car get sideways.
Right.
So the front is steering sideways with the little toe out, and the rear is slipping, drifting.
Right.
That's what we're doing.
Yeah.
But the front wheels control everything. So first the command comes from the steering wheel, and then the rear end of the car, after you shift the weight, then the rear of the car will either want to come around with toe out, have a neutral setting with 0 toe, or it will fight you. Say the car's coming around too easily. In other words, maybe you're spinning out 180 and you're just coming to a complete stop.
So if
maybe that's too it could be too much tire pressure. It could be too much toe out. So you want to back it down. Maybe so much that the pro drift cars, they all run static toe in because they have 1,000 horsepower. But if you had 150 horsepower, you're probably going to be on the toe outside in the rear.
Which means no matter what setting, we could just simply start from 0 toe.
0 toe in the rear is definitely a great place to start. Mm-hmm. So to review, 1/8 inch toe out in the front.
Right.
We think that's a good place for track drift cars. Mm-hmm. If it's a street car, 0 toe.
Yeah.
Because we're not trying to wear out the front tires on the street. You got to daily drive the thing. You could do 1/8 inch toe out when you get to the track on the toe plates. Now in the rear, whether it's street or track, we would generally start at 0 toe and 0 camber, because the thing that we're doing is we're burning the rear tires. So for the most rubber to contact the road and get burned up, it's going to be a totally straight and flat contact patch in the rear. So if you had you can imagine, toe's hard to think of, but camber is really obvious. So if you had a bunch of camber in the rear, then the inside of your rear tires would just wear out immediately as soon as they start spinning, right?
Yeah, if it's too much.
So it'll last for many, many more laps if you just have 0 camber, 0 toe in the rear.
So you also mentioned about the setting is all connect a horsepower of the car, and how stiff of the tire, like how much air pressure on the tire. So which means every single time we should just test drive on each different of tracks, and then we slightly adjust everything a little bit.
Sure.
So we can start it from a basic rule, setting, and then we should figure it out.
Yeah, so that's the starting place that I mentioned. And if you feel like you need more rear traction, then you can add static toe in. And when I say static, I mean like just when the car is sitting there. Not when the suspension is going through travel. So
you mean
next
the car on
we
the
can
ground,
next
sitting there.
Yeah, just sitting there. All day long. That's like it's static suspension sitting. So static ride height, static toe setting. Now, we sell something called a dynamic toe control rear knuckle. So that's another type of setting that will determine which direction the toe goes depending on if the rear suspension is compressed or not. So this is when we get into like a more pro setup. So any car with a lot of power, they might do static toe in. They might do a lot. Could do like a ½ inch or more of static toe in. But the reason why we can also stack dynamic toe change on top of that is because another thing that gets you a lot of power to the ground will be weight shifting over the rear. So you're going to use softer springs in the rear. So as soon as you hit the gas, the car is going to squat down in the back. It's going to shift its weight from front to rear. So with more weight over the rear, then you're able to have a more competitive drift. You can catch up to the guy in front of you, or if you're the lead car in tandem, then you can walk away from the car that's trying to chase you down. That's how you win. So the whole way that dynamic toe works in the rear is it's kind of like if you know about bump steer in the front. On the front knuckle, we have an outer tie rod, and that outer tie rod has like a bunch of different size spacers in there.
Right.
So you can add and remove spacers and washers until you don't have any toe change, because depending on the ride height of the car and the height of that taper pin on the outer tie rod, once those two things are tuned up together, then when an individual wheel hits a bump on one side of the car, the car will not react to it by steering to that side.
Which is more controllable.
More stable,
yeah,
more predictable.
Stable, yeah.
So we're looking for 0 bump steer, and we could just change that word to say 0 dynamic toe change in the front. So in the front, when the front wheel hits a bump, and these are the wheels that are totally controlling the car. The rear is kind of like following along.
Right.
You want the driver to have absolute stability and predictability in that steering wheel, and you don't want the car to be steering itself. Like if it, just hits a rock, or, just like the track curb on the Apex, if it steers itself, then you'll just spin out and the guy behind you will hit you, right? So we can use that same principle of a height change on the knuckle affecting if the wheel goes in or out, toes in or toes out on compression. So let's say after the front steers around that corner, even if the inside wheel kind of like bumps up over the track curb, the rear is riding smooth, just burning the rear tires. And so we're going to think of the toe change on compression in the rear when we change the height on that knuckle bracket. We're going to think about that for like extra toe in and extra traction when the car squats down in the back and it's really putting the power to the ground because you're really hard on the gas. So the weight has shifted and you're in a competition drift setting. So you want to be able to lunge forward when you get on the gas. And that's what that extra toe added on top of the static in a dynamic way. Like the more the car squats, the more it's going to toe in. Or depending on the track and the tire that you're using that day and your tire pressure and all the other things that help to make traction in the rear, like rear spring rate, rear sway bar, all kinds of stuff. You can, in certain situations, you can just change the pickup point on the knuckle, and you can have zero toe change if you really need predictability in that situation. Or for going back to like the low power car, if you get on the gas and every time you're having trouble actually like getting the car to initiate a drift, then you can have extra toe out when the car squats down. So that way, the more gas, the more sideways. So pro car will be like more gas, more grip, and then pulling away from the guy.
And at that moment is extra toe out?
Pro car, toe in, more traction. On the gas, pro car, squats down in the rear. Even more traction added to that with even more toe in.
Toe in.
The opposite of that would be like no horsepower, like a really low power car. Gets on the gas, still can't go sideways, even with like an 1/8 inch like toe out static. So that guy might want more gas, less traction, more gas, more sideways, just to let that car drift.
Right.
With 130 horsepower, depends on the car.
I see.
Also, in the pro car setting, we do those dynamic toe control brackets as something that bolts on to the cast or forged rear knuckle, because those are cheaply and easily replaced if you're riding on the wall and the rear tire gets into the wall. It's better to just destroy like a couple of plates or like a little bracket than to completely ruin your forged aluminum knuckle, right? So when you get experience and you're in a lot of situations where you're coming into contact with cars on the track, you're coming into contact with doing like dirt drops, track curbs, gator backs, getting into like the K-rail barriers, it messes stuff up. We're really hard on our cars. So if we designed in an intentional fail point that is cheap and easy to replace, then those kind of things should be in your spares box. So if you're in an oval course and you're coming down off the bank, and half the time when you come off the bank at the wrong angle, you're just like a little too deep, and the entire car's weight is on one of the front wheels, and you notice that you bend an outer tie rod taper pin, then those things aren't very expensive. It's certainly less expensive than the whole like tie rod assembly, which might include a rack forward offsetter,
right,
inner tie rod, outer tie rod, that taper pin that I mentioned, and a turnbuckle in between them, right?
Right.
If you can just slide a new pin in there, bolt that thing on, and keep going without destroying the whole tie rod, then
awesome.
You're going to be a happy guy.
You're right.
And at Part Shop Max, even if you do destroy any component, even if it's the one that we don't intend for you to destroy all the time, you can get that individual component. So, for example, if you bend the inner tie rod, then we'll just sell you one tie rod. You don't have to buy the complete set. So that saves you money. We stock spares. So, like I said, the toe control brackets and the like taper pins, we have that stuff in stock every day. You should have it in your trailer, thinking ahead, due to your experience. Or even if you don't have experience, then you can kind of ride on the advice of others. And when you're putting your car together, it's like, buy an extra $20 part so that
just have a spare
you've
parts before go to the track.
Yeah. After you've spent your life savings building this car and you have all these great parts on it and you get out to the track and the first time you initiate a drift, like your track day is over because you didn't bring a $20 spare, does that even make sense?
Yeah, especially we still need to pay some fee for the whole day.
Oh,
right?
You bought tires, you
right.
bought entry
Yeah.
fees, it's a big deal.
Yes.
It's an expensive sport.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can rescue an entire day's worth of drifting at the track for $20, then when you're placing your order for the parts the first time, drop Tommy an email, ask him what spares you should be getting that complement these parts, and yeah, that'll just get you a lot more time on track for a lot less money.
Okay, well, thank you. I think I totally understand right now.
No problem. Okay, so to follow up on our conversation about dynamic toe, there's an important thing that everybody needs to wrap their head around, and that's the opposites. So when we talk about dynamic toe in, we're talking about toe in upon compression. So you hit the gas, you got tons of horsepower, you want extra grip to put that power to the ground when the car squats. So we usually just talk about that direction in short. So toe in, extra toe in on compression. So the opposite of that is when you lift off the gas. So the character is something like this on track. You're always on and off the gas, right? So you're riding the wall in the pro car. You've initiated your drift, you pick up the throttle, and you can carry a huge amount of speed around the corner. Whether you're doing a wall ride or you're hitting an inner clip, you can carry a huge amount of speed. Typically on the track, the corners go from like small to medium, or from large to medium to small. They kind of like tighten up towards the end. So the thing that you really need to wrap your head around is, yes, in competition, everybody's searching for traction. When they get on the gas, they want to be able to use that traction, get as much traction as they want. But you also have to expect that the opposite is going to happen when you get off the gas. So you have extra traction, the car's squatting, you get off the gas, the rear end lifts up. So upon extension in the rear, then the toe is going to go in the opposite direction, which is back out or, just back to neutral. So in other words, it's going to be easier for the rear end to come around. Now, when you add angle on a drift car, you are slowing down. Like the fastest way to drive a car is straight. The fastest way to drift the car is at low angle. So if we're going through the course and it's like a drag race and then a huge radius turn and you just want as much speed as possible to get around that big turn and leave the guy that's chasing you in that drag race. Now you come up to a smaller radius corner, you're going to lift off, the car's going to want to come around now instead of being gripped up, but when it's coming around, it's appropriate for that progression of smaller radius turns from the beginning to the end of the course. So you jam on the gas at the big corner, and then you transition, you lift off the gas. The car is going to get way extra angle, which is exciting. You got the counter steer, you got 65 plus degrees of steering angle to handle that car getting sideways. You're simultaneously scrubbing off speed because big angle is like a big reduction in speed, and that's appropriate for that smaller corner. It's just that you need to wrap your head around that character of what happens when you're on the gas and what happens when you're off the gas, because it's way more dramatic, right? Let's flip that over, and we are also talking about another kind of opposite earlier, which is the low power car situation. So low power car, it's so hard just to like stay in a drift. And so we might actually set the dynamic toe to be toe out upon compression. So that low power car, he's actually able, after the drag race, to continue burning tire all the way around that big radius, right? Because it's actually like a toe out. Then the cool thing for a low power car is if you have an oh my God moment, like if the guy you're following spins out in front of you suddenly, and your immediate reaction should always be to lift off the gas. You're not just going to continue slamming the gas pedal and T-boning the guy in front of you. Your foot is going to lift off the gas and jam on the brakes, right? So to assist this, if you actually added toe on compression when you're burning around that large radius turn, then the car suddenly in front of you spins and you're about to hit the guy. When you lift off, you get all that traction back. You can control the car and avoid the dude that spun in front of you. So, yeah, you have to think about the equal and opposite reaction of whatever you do on compression, it's going to be the opposite of that when you lift. And then the strategy for the pro car and the beginner might be completely different strategies as well. So as long as you know what to expect, and then you can kind of like adapt your driving style to that. So you can do some pretty exciting drifting. You can really like level up that angle, that grip, that speed. It's just, know what to expect in those opposite situations.